Hello class, in today's video we're going to be looking at collecting and using data. The learning intentions of this video is we're going to understand how surveys work, we're going to understand the difference between the two words population and a sample, we're going to be able to decide if a survey is representative, and lastly we're going to know how to describe types of data using the keywords categorical or numerical, and there are other subtypes of each of these. So firstly, what is a survey? Well, we know that a survey is a tool used to assess the thoughts, opinions, and feelings of an individual. What it does is it actually provides us a snapshot of the attitudes and behaviors of those participants at that time when we actually undertake the survey. Now, what's really good is that the results from a survey can be used to obviously increase the knowledge. So what we could do is we could find out what is the unemployment rate, the levels of obesity, and attitudes to remote learning. So that's some of the things or some of the data that we can actually collect from a survey. We could also use it to compare results. So we could see whether there is an impact between different years. Or what we could also do is the results from a survey can also govern us to make very important decisions. So if there is a lot of negative attitudes to remote learning, then the Department of Education can make some changes, or teachers can make some changes to actually care and provide better education for their students. So we're going to be looking at the two words now, population and sample. And to help you understand the differences between these two words, I'm going to be using an example. So what we're going to be doing is, I will conduct a survey to determine how remote learning has affected students' learning and well-being. Now, in this particular study over here, what I'm interested in is the students' learning and well-being. So therefore, my target audience is the students. I'm not really interested at all about elderly people at all or other members of the general public. I'm just interested in students. Now, another word of saying the target audience is the word population. So therefore, the population that I'm actually interested in to conduct my particular study are students. So just note that the word population and target audience can kind of be used interchangeably in this case over here. Now, when I'm trying to conduct my actual study or my survey, it's not really plausible for me to actually administer the survey for every particular student there is to obtain my results. The reason why it's kind of feasible or it's not possible to do it all is because if I administer to every student, first of all, this would be ridiculously time consuming, but also this would cost a lot of money as well, because generally, as you probably are aware, no one really likes taking surveys. So in order for people to usually participate in a survey, what the researcher generally does is they actually give them maybe a $20 gift card or some kind of incentive for people to actually undertake surveys. So these are the reasons why you don't administer surveys to all the members of your population. Instead, what we do is we take a very small group of people and we study them instead. So what we'll do is I'll conduct a survey for all Kings Park Copperfield students to determine how remote learning has affected their personal learning and well-being. So again, my audience is still, I'm only interested in students. However, my participants, the people who are undertaking my study, are the Copperfield College students, more specifically the Kings Park Copperfield College students. Now, we said earlier on that the word audience is kind of interchangeable for the word population, and now the participants, the people who are actually doing or conducting the study, they are what we refer to as the sample. So by taking a smaller sample, this is going to be firstly less time consuming and less costly. So this is why we actually give out surveys to a sample as opposed to actually giving it out to all members of the general public. So on this particular slide over here, I've got the definitions of population and sample. So I said population is the collection of all items generally meaning people in this case, of interest to study. And these people will have like desired traits or features to be in the study. In contrast, a sample is a subset, meaning it's a portion of the population, and these are the actual participants of the study. So in my diagram over here, you can see that I've got 12 people in my participants. So let's just say this is the class over here. But when I'm actually administering the survey, I might only be giving it to 4 people down down below. So this is the fundamental difference between a population and a sample. Population is everything, all members with the desired characteristics who I'm interested in, but the sample is just the participants that I could actually gather, not actually gather, but the participants that I've chosen to actually select to undertake this particular survey. Okay class, it's now time for you to test your understanding to see whether you are able to identify the population and sample in the following example. So please pause this video right now and have a go. You don't really need to write down the question, just write down the answer in your exercise book so that I can actually see that you've attempted. So the question reads, the owners of a sports stadium wanted to predict what additional refreshment options would sell well. They selected 80 seat numbers at random and surveyed the occupants of those seats. Choose the correct answer in this case. So the owner of the sports stadium actually tested out, in this case over here, all the people, or not all the people, the audience in this case is the people who actually attends the stadium. So that is our population. So the population is, in this case, the audience or people attending a sports stadium. And in this case, the sample is the 80 seat numbers that he's randomly selected. All right, so all we need to do is pretty much identify which option corresponds to this description over here. So in this case, A says the population is all people who buy refreshments. Not necessarily at all. Your target audience is people who just attend or rock up to the actual thing. So this is automatically incorrect. B says the population is the occupants of the 80 selected seats. This is incorrect because this over here is your sample, because that's the one you've actually administered the actual survey to. So that's incorrect. So therefore, our last option, C, should be correct, which reads the population is the occupants of all seats in the sports stadium and the sample is the occupants of the 80 selected seats. So therefore, C is going to be the correct answer. So hopefully you guys got that correct. What we're going to be looking at next is something referred to as the representative sample. Now, we know that statistics can be used to actually guide our thinking process, but sometimes statistics can be used to mislead people. And so what I'm really trying to say in this particular slide is it's really important that you really do not believe in all statistics that's given to you guys. Not all data obtained from surveys are accurate, firstly, and the reason why it's not accurate is because the way that the survey is administered or given is incorrect. So you have to be really critical of the results and judge whether they're going to be credible or not. Data from a survey is often used to make a claim to persuade people, but it's important that we do take it with a grain of salt and we do assess whether it's going to be credible or not. So how do we decide whether the results from a specific survey is reliable and believable? The way that we do this is actually by determining how the actual participants in the actual study got recruited. So we look at how did they get sampled. The sample that we use needs to be carefully chosen to ensure the results we obtain are accurate and reliable, and the way that we do this is by ensuring those participants in the sample reflect those of the general population. So what would happen if we didn't carefully recruit people in our sample? Well, what would happen is that obviously we're going to get inaccurate data. So this is going to lead to false data and it's going to be a bit biased. What could also happen is that obviously we're going to be wasting time because we had to administer those surveys. We also waste money as a result because we give incentives generally for people who undertake surveys. What also happens is that because surveys are used to inform and make decisions, this will result in poor or inaccurate decisions. This will also result in poor or inaccurate generalizations or claims. But also, it will make the company or the researcher who's administered the actual survey less credible and reputable. So a representative sample is a small number of people that reflects as accurately as possible. Now, this is not always going to be the case, but we try to make it as accurate as possible of the larger population. Now, there are certain features that allows us to determine whether a particular sample is representative or whether it's good enough for us to believe. So one of the ways we can determine whether the results are reliable is by, firstly, it needs to have a fairly large number of participants. Obviously, the less number of participants in your study, the less reliable and accurate your results are going to be. It also needs to be randomly selected. So what this means is you cannot select participants because of a certain bias that you may have, or if you selected them due to convenience. The third thing is that they obviously need to be reflective of the entire population, and the way that we do this is by having diversity within the participants. So having people of different cultures, different races, having like roughly equivalent genders in the actual sample. So these are some of the examples or some of the ways that we can ensure the sample we have are as accurate as possible. Now, if you remember from our previous example, we said that we were going to administer a survey so that we can determine how did remote learning affect students' learning and well-being. And the way that we were going to give out this survey was by giving it to Kings Park Copperfield students. Now, the data that I obtained from this particular survey will be slightly inaccurate and slightly skewed. And the reason why the data I obtained from this survey is going to be skewed is because that I've decided, or I've deliberately chosen to give it to people of Kings Park Copperfield students, which in this case over here is conveniently chosen. And when something is convenient, this automatically means that this is not representative for all students within the nation, within Australia at all. Students from KP are from a certain demographic and do not reflect the thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors of students in other areas that would otherwise have a different demographic. So there might be a lot more Asians, a lot more less Asians, a bit more white people, etc., etc. Different cultures, different races, different religions, and different socioeconomic status. Another reason why this is going to be inaccurate is because since I'm the one conducting the experiment and I'm teaching some of the students, the results are also going to be a bit more biased as well. So as a result, the data that I've generated from this survey is going to be inaccurate. Let's look at another example. This example reads, a survey is carried out on the internet to determine Australia's favourite musical performer. Why will this sample not necessarily be representative of Australia's views? So in this case over here, I'm going to be highlighting the key information. The target audience or the population is Australia, so all Australian people. And the sample in this case is people who answered this survey on the internet. And then because this survey was given out only on the internet, this is therefore going to be a not representative sample because the participants in the study are those that have access to the internet. Hence, they do not truly reflect opinions of all Australian people because it doesn't take into consideration of people who do not have internet access. It's now time for you guys to have a shot at for yourself. So for this question over here, a survey is carried out in a library to determine typical study habits of Year 12 students. Why would this sample not necessarily be representative of all Year 12 students? So please pause this video right now. There's actually multiple answers you can come up with this question. It's quite open-ended. So give yourself about a minute or 2 minutes or so, write down a few dot points, and then we'll compare your answers later on. So if you've done this already, an answer that you could be getting is that you could say it's not representative because the participants in the study are those who are willingly, who want to go to the library, which shows some signs of commitment, engagement, and motivation. As a result of this, the responses that I'm going to get from the survey are those that are generally studious and willing to go to the library. They do not account for those with different levels of motivation and engagement. So therefore, the study habits that I recorded from the survey will not be reflective of people who don't attend or don't even go to the library at all. Other answers that you could actually write is that a survey was conveniently conducted at that particular library, hence they do not reflect the responses of all Year 12 students are found across the whole nation. Another way you could say this is due to differences in demographics, Year 12 participants in this particular library may not be diverse and take into account differences in socioeconomic status, religion, English fluency, differences in learning styles, etc., etc. So hopefully by answering or looking at these few examples, you have a better understanding. What I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to spend around 15 minutes to answer these questions from exercise 9A. So these are all the questions in total, but what I'd like you to do now is just answer questions 3, 4, as well as 5. Give yourself 15 minutes and then we'll compare your answers. If you've done this successfully, these are the answers that you should have obtained. So please make sure you grab a red pen and self-correct yourself because I like to see you guys self-assessing yourself as well. We'll be moving on to the next topic right now. What we're going to be looking at now is we're going to be looking at types of data. So depending on the survey questions asked, you may get 2 different types of data or information. So if the topic of our survey is kind of based around or centered around milk tea, one of the questions I could ask you is, which place makes the best milk tea? And if I asked you this question, some of the responses that I could obtain is Gongcha, Cha Time, Coco, or Gotcha. And there are other examples as well, but these are some of the responses I could get. But if I've asked you a different question, if I asked you on average, how many times do you order from Gongcha in a week? Some of the answers that I might expect is 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now notice that for each of these different types of survey questions, I'm getting a different type of response. On the left-hand side of here, I'm actually getting categorical or more descriptive word responses, whereas on the right-hand side, I'm actually going to get a numerical value, which I'm actually measuring or recording in this case. So to summarize this, the data or the information I get from a survey could either be categorical or they could either be numerical. Down below on this flowchart, I described differences between these two. So a categorical data generally, that's the key word over here, generally does not include a numerical value. So that's one of the ways you could identify whether something's categorical. The data can be sorted into groups or categories, and it's often descriptive. It provides information. In contrast, numerical data is generally recorded data that is measured, so you are going to get a value, numerical value, and these values can actually be rearranged from smallest to largest. Now, there's this common misconception that many students have, and they believe that any data that gives any numerical responses is equivalent or is an example of numerical data. However, this is false because categorical data can take on numerical values. I'll show you an example over here to show you what I mean. So an example is responses that have 1 low, 2 medium, 3 high is an example of a categorical data. And the reason why that is because those particular numbers don't really have a mathematical meaning. Instead, those numbers correspond to a label or to different categories. As a result, this is an example of categorical data, although it uses numerical values. So in the previous slide, we already looked at how data can be summarized to either being a categorical or numerical. However, we can even be more specific than that. We could even go to say that categorical data could either be ordinal or nominal, and numerical data could either be discrete or continuous. Let's look at what these terms are. So for categorical data, ordinal data are responses that can be ordered. So it's kind of in the name of it, and that's how you're gonna differentiate between ordinal and nominal. So an example of an ordinal categorical data is how satisfied are you with Mr. Doe's online lessons? So you could either answer as very satisfied, satisfied, indifferent, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. But notice that each of these responses over here, there's a hierarchy. I could actually put this in an order from, let's say, the lowest to the highest in this case, lowest being very dissatisfied and highest being very satisfied. So because I can rank these, this is an example of ordinal categorical data. In contrast, nominal data are responses that have no particular order whatsoever. So an example could be, what languages can Mr. Doe speak? So I could either answer as English, Japanese, Cantonese, Vietnamese, or Korean. In this case over here, I can't really order the languages at all. There's no superiority or hierarchy in this case. So this is an example of nominal. Other examples of nominal categorical data includes colors, because you can't really put a rank in a color at all. If I say the favorite color is black, green, and yellow, there really isn't a ranking between those three colors at all. In contrast, numerical data, we said, could be separated into discrete or continuous. So discrete data is numerical responses that can take on certain values. So there's fixed values, and you can only choose that value and another value. There isn't really any other value in between. So for instance, what is your shoe size? So you could answer 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, and the list keeps going. You really can't say that your shoe size is 7.2 or 7.1. So as a result, because they can only take on these fixed values or these certain values, this is an example of discrete data. In contrast, continuous data is numerical values that can take on pretty much any values whatsoever. So that means you can take on like these decimal values. So an example is, what is your height? You can be more specific and go into the millimeters and stuff like that. So you could record yourself being 158 centimeters, 163.2, 174.6, etc., etc. So that is an example of continuous. Now notice over here that the common misconception is students often think that anything with a decimal is continuous, but that's not always the case as shown in this example over here. So you can have decimals in discrete, but you can't take on pretty much any other decimal value than this. So what I'd like you to do for the remainder of today's lesson is I'd like you to answer questions 1 as well as 2. And once you've done that, then answer questions 8. And once you've finished answering these questions, I'd like you to please self-assess yourself to ensure that you got the answers correct. And then lastly, once you've finished answering all the textbook questions, please make sure you answer this exit ticket over here after you've actually completed your textbook questions. This is the end of today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs up if you liked it. I'll see you guys again in the next video. Bye.